Hardy herbaceous perennials are a wonderful addition to our gardens. They provide us with colorful flowers and showy foliage. We don't have to buy and replant them every year because they return from underground plant parts. And they also give us that sense of anticipation that we really don't get with annuals. Annuals pretty much look the same. They're blooming when we buy them and plant them, and they bloom through the year, and hopefully they're still blooming when they freeze in the fall. But again, they pretty much look the same all through the year. Perennials bring that dynamic dimension to our gardens that give us something to look forward to. I know that I really get a good feeling when I'm out walking in the garden and I see a plant start to break bud and start to grow for the first time in the spring after it's had its long winter nap. Then the anticipation continues as the foliage gets larger, and then we also have anticipation. We see those buds start to form, and then finally when it comes into bloom. And then with all the different types of perennials and all the different bloom times, there's always something blooming or something happening in the perennial garden. So it's no wonder that these plants have become so popular, and perennial gardening has really taken off in the last 20 years. Well, even though we don't have to replant our perennials every year, there's still some garden chores that we need to do to make sure that they look good and perform the way we want them to. Well, before the new growth of the new season gets to be too tall, we need to come away and cut away all the growth from last year. And you can see that this has already been done here as the tops have been cut off these plants. Well, also, in addition to just our normal maintenance of watering, weeding, and keeping our perennial beds mulched, the perennials, or most of them anyway, need to be divided periodically to keep them from spreading too much and also to rejuvenate the plants. The reason that the plants spread in the first place, no matter how slow or how fast, is to colonize new area. The soil can be depleted of nutrients after several years in one spot, so the plants kind of move to new ground to start growing in those areas. Another reason they spread is just to lessen the competition that is created by this matrix of all those stems and roots in the same place. Well, I'm going to divide this plant. This is a solidago or goldenrod. And when it comes to the timing of when we divide our perennials, you want to do it opposite the season that it blooms. For instance, if a plant blooms in the spring, we'll want to come in and divide it in the fall. If the plant blooms in the fall, we'll want to divide it in the spring. And then if it's a summer blooming perennial, you have your choice. You can divide those in the spring or the fall. And actually, plants that bloom in the spring can also be divided after they bloom, as long as you do the division or transplanting before it gets too hot. If you can get it done during the month of May or very early June, you can still transplant those spring blooming perennials. And also those spring blooming perennials can be divided before they flower, as long as you realize you're going to be sacrificing 1 year's flowering. And you may want to think about that if you want to dig up some of your plants to share with friends, or you just want to move some to a different part of your garden. You can still move them before they flower in the spring, but just realize you'll miss out on the flowering for that 1 year. The factors that determine how often plants need to be divided depends on what kind of a plant it is and also how good the growing conditions are. For instance, perennials like the baptisias, the butterfly weeds, the peonies, hostas, Russian sage, and the hardy hibiscus don't really spread that much in the garden. So they can wait to be divided 12, maybe even 15 years before some of those plants need to be divided. On the other hand, we have some perennials that like to spread quite a bit, like our monardas, some of the phlox species, the bishop's goutweed, and the obedient plant, that we really need to divide those every 2 years to kind of keep them in their place. Well, I'm going to plop this goldenrod out of the ground here, and I just want to point out this is one of my favorite goldenrod cultivars. This is one called Golden Fleece, and it's really a good plant because it doesn't get too tall and flop over in the garden. It's a very well-behaved goldenrod. Now that I've got it out of the hole here, somewhat keep the main part of the root ball intact. And I'm just going to take my shovel and slice through this big clump here. And if you do this, if you split the clumps with a shovel, you will slice some of the roots and stems, but this plant is so healthy and vigorous, it's not really going to hurt it to have a few of those stems and roots sliced away on the edge. If you feel that that method of division is a little too aggressive and you want to do something a little bit different, you could get 2 of these garden forks, put those into the center of the clump, back to back, and then just gently pry them apart. And that way the stems and roots will separate also without having to be sliced into 2 pieces. But again, if the plant is healthy and vigorous, it's not going to hurt it too much just to slice away a few of those. Well, I'm going to continue to slice with the shovel here and just break this into even a smaller section. And one of the good things, of course, about dividing our perennials is that we have lots more of them to share with our gardening friends. Well, this is a good size clump right here, and you can kind of see in the center here some of the old pieces of the plant are a little more coarse and tough. We only want to keep the outer portions, the more young and vigorous parts of the plant. So we'll come back and plant these in this spot. While we're dividing our perennials, it also gives us a good opportunity to rejuvenate the soil where they've been growing for several years. As I mentioned earlier, sometimes the plants will start to spread to gain new ground for new nutrients. Well, after we dug them out of the hole, we've got a hole there already, so we can just come in with some organic matter and fill in that hole and resupply some of those nutrients. Just kind of rejuvenate the spot where the plant was growing also. I think I'm just going to take the wheelbarrow here, put all of the soil in there. Got a good amount of organic matter from our compost pile. And what I'll do now, just kind of scoop these over a little. I'll just kind of work that around, kind of mix it a little with the surrounding soil. That way it'll be a more uniform spot and kind of blend it in with the surrounding soil a little better. It won't be just solid organic matter in that spot. But again, this is a good way to help provide some future fertilizer also for your perennials. And another way you might think about fertilizing your perennials is to come in periodically, remove the mulch, and just spread about a 2-inch layer of organic matter around the plants in the springtime before they really get growing. Okay, now that we've got the area completely rejuvenated with new organic matter, we'll replant 1 portion of this golden fleece solidago. So we'll try to get it about the same ground level as it was growing. Firm the soil around, not too tight. And some of this extra soil, we're actually going to build a little moat, or just a little berm around the plant. Hold in some moisture. And we'll keep an eye on this and make sure that we keep it well watered so it'll regrow and reestablish itself just like the parent plant. Especially keeping a close eye on it whenever it gets hot this summer. Well, ideally, the best day to do division and transplanting of perennials would be on a cloudy or overcast day. But if you're doing it like we are today with a bright, somewhat warm, sunny day, the plants could start to wilt on you a little bit. So what I like to do is to create some sort of a shade structure over the plant. And I just take some bamboo stakes like we've got right here, just kind of insert those into the ground like so. And got 3 stakes. I've got one more right over here. But it's really a simple little method. You're just building a little shade structure, almost maybe like a little tent or something. We'll insert this last one in the ground. Got a little piece of wire here to securely fasten that to the bamboo stake. And we'll just make sure this wire is really tight on here, because we don't want this to blow away in all these high winds that we have here in Oklahoma. But it may look a little bit hokey, but you wouldn't believe the results you'll get by providing a little bit of shade for these plants. They'll just recover a lot quicker. They won't wilt nearly as bad. Well, we'll leave this on for a few days, and once the plant stops wilting and looks like it's got its feet established in the soil, we'll come out and remove it and let it fend for itself. Sometimes when we put a perennial in our garden, we later realize that we could have created a really neat combination if we had planted it maybe against some other plants. That way the colors could kind of play off of each other and just make a really neat combination. Well, it's not too late to dig that plant up and move it. And this is a good time of the year to do that. If we take our time and we're really careful, we get a really good sized root ball, and we take really good care of the plant after we've moved it, we can move most any perennial this time of the year. Well, that's what I'm gonna do with these lamb's ears here. We've got a huge clump of them, and I'm just gonna dig up a clump. We've got some fairly hard soil here, so that kind of lets you know how tough this plant is. But again, I wanna try not to break up that root ball. Get a good enough size one on there. We're going to move this over to our patio garden. We've got an interesting display that we're trying to create over there. The lamb's ears, of course, are a very tough plant. They're no stranger to tough conditions. In fact, they're native to Iran. So those dry areas in the Middle East are nothing compared to what we have. Lamb's ear actually doesn't quite like a lot of humidity or moisture, but again, no stranger to the heat. You can see some of the clay that this plant is growing in. I think sometimes people forget about lamb's ear and just the fact that you can use this plant anywhere in your perennial garden. They look really good up in the front of the beds, anywhere where you need a low splash of nice silver color. Well, here we are in the patio garden. You can see I've already got my hole dug here, and we'll just set this in place. And again, we want to try to get the plant planted at pretty close to the level of where it's growing. The lamb's ears, if you crowd them too much with other plants, they tend to have some problems with the humidity, and they can look a little ratty. So if you can give them some good air circulation, that would be good. And the lamb's ear, of course, will bloom later in the spring. So what we're doing, we're transplanting it or digging it up before it blooms, and we realize that we may sacrifice those flowers. But then again, we don't really grow lamb's ears for the flowers. We grow it for these wonderful little soft, fuzzy silver leaves. We'll transplant a few more of these plants over into this bed, and we'll take a look later of how well they handle the move.
We hope you've enjoyed this classic from the Oklahoma Gardening Vault. Remember, even though these tips and techniques are timeless, there's always something new to learn in the world of gardening. By subscribing to both Oklahoma Gardening and OK Gardening Classics, you'll have access to a wealth of gardening knowledge, both classic and contemporary.